My name is Steve Striebel, as Ivan has already said. I'm going to start off here with just a bunch of thank yous. First of all, to the library and to the amazing staff, talented staff here at the library and all they do for the town. Thank you, Ivan. I would also like to thank our videographer, Shane Peters, who is the man behind the camera and who is putting all this together for us technically, which is great. Also to Claire Green, because Claire has been really inspirational in just pushing this project. How you doing on it? How you doing on it? Keep going, you know. And Pam Kimball, who has actually done a lot to help me get this stuff together. And most of all, to our panel here. At the end of the table is George Day, if you just smile or wave so we know who you are. There we are, excellent. Harry Greenwald, Deborah Edson, and Dougie Edson. And I'm not even going to bother introducing them in terms of who they are or who they were in 1970, 73. You'll figure that out as the conversation goes along. I'm going to say for the panel, there will be certain people at times who will have the most information, but pretty much we're set up here and we have a small group that if anybody has comments and wants to get in on the conversation, feel free. We have that luxury, which is pretty cool. The subject, I think, as hopefully everybody knows, is the Brotherhood of the Spirit comes to Warwick. And for people here in Warwick, it was a pretty big deal. And that's maybe an understatement. Certainly in 1970, it was a very big deal. It was a pretty brief deal. It lasted from 1970, and Doug and I talked about this the other day. We put the date 1973, but the communes leaving the town of Warwick was over a period of time, and Doug and will address that a little bit later on. The basic topic here is, as I said, is the commune comes to Warwick. Harry and I talked, a month or more ago about trying to put a little order to this event, which really was, we had basically three things. One is, why did the commune come to Warwick? That's the first sort of section that we're going to try to deal with. The second part is very simply, what was their effect on the town, on people in the commune during the time of which they were here in Warwick. And then the final section is really sort of twofold. It is, why did they leave? How did that happen? And beyond that is, how did their leaving and how did Warwick trying to get back to basic Warwick, how did all that happen? And what happened? Were there changes? Just a little bit about, the whole business of why this event is taking place. Conversations with a lot of people in town, George, Alan Morgan, various people, about, there was this really great story that so-and-so used to tell, and it was really, we never got a chance to record it. And he died last spring. It's like, oh yeah, we've lost another kind of link to the past, and that's why we're trying to do this. And you can see we're all kind of getting on in age, so we want to, and that's why we're doing this. The format is something loosely referred to as oral history. History comes in a variety of forms, and we all know the history books, newspapers, blogs, TV, all kinds of stuff. Oral history is kind of special. It is most often brought out by or expressed by people who were maybe at the event, maybe participated in the event, or knew people who were there. It's verbal, it's essentially a recollection. And as in this case, the recollection is taking place over 50 years is when what we're talking about actually happened, which is a little sobering, maybe.
Steve, since we're talking about this as a record, I think there's one piece of information I should put on the table for everybody, which is During the period that we're talking about here, Debbie, Doug, and I did not know that we would become family. That years after the events that we're going to talk about, my brother Stephen took up with Doug's sister Barbara. But that takes place after the time period we're here, and they were married until, unfortunately, Barbara passed away a few years ago. So I just wanted to get that on the record.
Thank you.
Okay, and
A
as far as
twist
the
of
record's
fate,
concerned,
right? A simple twist
yeah,
of fate.
well, good for you guys. The friction, if there was any, didn't last X number of years, so I'm glad you made it, if that was the case. I think we're really ready to start with the actual discussion. And what it really, that piece of it, as Harry and I talked about, would really be, and I'm looking at Doug and Debbie, is kind of what was the commune, how was it, how did it sort of get together, and how did they end up here in Warwick?
Okay.
So, Doug, we can go back to the treehouse.
That would be me, because Deb did not show up on to the commune until 1970 when we were already here in Warwick. So, yes, it did start in a treehouse in Leiden, and it started with a gentleman named Michael Metallica, who I actually went to high school with and became friends with. So at first it was a very small group of people.
I'm being asked for speakers to speak up if possible.
Okay.
This is the interruption.
So it started with a small group of people, and it was a time of unrest. Everyone was, as young people just graduating high school, the Kennedy had been assassinated, the second Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. Who was it? Oh, God. The other assassination was the Martin Luther King. And, there was a lot of political unrest, but there was also people just starting to want to look at our whole parents' value system and going, is, the seeking of material alone, there's got to be something more. And that's how it started. And we were also looking into ourselves and trying to find a more spiritual basis of life, not what the current religions were teaching or practicing, but just trying to look at things in a different way, in a different perspective. So time-wise, we built this tree house in Warwick, and we also put...
In Leiden.
In Leiden,
Yep.
yes, in Leiden, not Warwick, yeah. In Leiden, and we also built, on another piece of property in Leiden, a small lean-to, where I think there was probably 6 or 7 young gentlemen, and also we had some ladies that were involved, and they stayed with a teacher, Mrs. Kroll. Their 2 daughters were involved in the original commune, and 2 other young ladies stayed there. So it was kind of like a separate thing at first. And what we did at first was we actually helped out the local farmers. There was Robert Krautwurst, who had a herd of milk cows. I think he had 27 Ashiers. And anyways, he had broken his foot playing softball. He shattered his ankle, and he was running the farm by himself. So a group of us would go over every day and milk his cows for him, morning and evening. And we did that for almost a year while he recovered. And we also helped at the Heron farm, whose property the tree house was actually on. They were also dairy farmers, but they had a blueberry, wild blueberry patches that they. So we helped in harvesting the blueberries and things like that, and haying and doing whatever we could on the farm, and we basically worked for free for food. So from then we went on. There was this excursion we did one weekend. We went to see a friend of ours in Maine, and while we were away, some local individuals burned our treehouse down. So we came back to not having a home. And from there, we were invited to Charlemont, to the land of Molly Scott owned, who had a TV show at the time. Molly Scott was a folk singer, and she also had a daytime children's show in New York City. So she invited us to the farm, and that was the beginning of the winter of from 68 to 69, that winter. And what we did there was we helped harvest maple syrup. And more people came. We actually had a big house that we lived in, and just started practicing meditation, singing, just being people together, and trying to learn about ourselves and how to be better people, how to be better human beings.
Dougie, do you have any sense of what the numbers were like?
At that time,
60
I
to
think
69.
there was probably maybe 12 to 16 people
Okay.
at the most.
Okay.
And then we also had many friends in the community that we would visit, and they would come and visit us. And then there was we also did a lot of farming there too in the springtime. We started our own huge gardens. We planted, when we were doing organic farming. And anyways, there was some type of falling out between our leader, Michael Metallica, and Molly Scott. So we decided to leave. And from there, we moved to Johnson's Pasture in Guilford, Vermont, which there was two other communes already on that property. There was the Johnson Pasture commune, and there was also the Liberation News Service, which was a much more political, active type commune. So anyways, we summered there, and the original cabin that we had built in Leiden, we actually took apart and moved it to Johnson's Pasture and reassembled it. And I remember for a while that like half the siding wasn't on it, so it was like the wind would blow through and so forth. But and so anyways, we summered there, and more people showed up. I believe that was the summer that Woodstock occurred, because I remember hearing about it, but we did not participate. And so to try to make this, there's just so many things that were happening. But from Johnson's Pasture, well, because we didn't really have that cabin winterized, we then moved to Heath, to the Rainville camps, which were a summer camp in Heath. And we winterized these cabins or whatever, and kept growing. And through that winter, a lot more people came. We started to travel to different churches and speak to people. And when we did various, we just traveled around to a lot of different churches and things.
I'm just going to interject something historically, though. This is a time when UMass, being basically right close by, professors there were delighted to have this experiment happening up in the hills that they could bring their sociology students to and say,
Right.
"Hey, let's go experience this thing for real and check it out, right?" So we were like an experiment for people to
Yeah.
go, "Whoa, how does this work? What are they doing out there anyway? What is this?"
Yeah, and at the same period of time, the UMass Department of Education was led by, I can't remember, Dwight, his last name escapes me, but he was very interested in alternative experiments in education, and that was going on at the same time.
Right. So, yeah, we did get a lot of visitors from University of Massachusetts, and also at that time we also had a segment on 60 Minutes.
That's okay. Talk about advertising.
Right.
Getting out.
And so, and at first we had this one main camp at this, what we call the Rainville camps, and we actually had to open up a couple others like about a mile away because they were kind of spaced out or whatever, and that's how many we realized that we're getting all these people, and we have no land, we have no property of our own, and that's when we started to pool all the resources we had. Anybody that had trust funds or any kind of monies or whatever, and how to buy a piece of property. So, and another thing that happened was we had two at that time, because most of us were in our 20s, we actually had two elderly ladies show. They were in their early 40s. And it was
Old people.
old, yeah. They were really sweet. But Ruth Miller and Phyllis Hamilton. And we used them as the front ladies to buy the property here in Warwick. We found out about this house it was actually an inn and a restaurant on Shepherdson Road in Warwick. It had 26 acres, the main farmhouse, and it had an attached restaurant. And so we purchased the property, and we didn't move there all at once. I was one of the first people to move there and to start getting the place ready for people. And when we did arrive in Mass, it was like, I remember a very good friend of ours, from 88 Main Street.
Beth.
Beth Backman. Beth Hapgood. She always said that we descended upon Warwick like a horde of locusts.
I think, Dougie, just kind of a quick thing, which is a big piece of this. You mentioned the two women that served as sort of a front for you guys. I think we should explain more specifically that had the community en masse gone and said, hey, we want to buy this and move in, it wouldn't have flown. So
Absolutely.
the decision was to have these older women basically go to Warwick and make the deal on the property. And at which point, the deal was done and things began to happen. There was going to be someone here today who can't make it. Her husband has health issues and what have you, Frederica Fellows. And Freddie, her family, her father, and George, you could be sort of helpful on this a little bit. They owned the property that was being sold. And Freddie has mentioned the Main family lived in Cambridge and would come out. I guess the Harris family lived for years, going back in history at this place, and then younger generations moved away, but they always came back, so that the homestead, or whatever they called it, was near and dear to everybody's heart. And when this situation occurred, i.e. the two older women and then the whole commune coming in, it was pretty devastating to the family, this whole thing. And I don't know, George, whether you have any comments. You at that point were police chief or on the police department in town?
Oh, Mr. Lincoln was.
Fred, not Fred.
I joined
yes.
I became a constable of
Okay.
police, in '68. And,
Is that Frederica? Oh, wow. Freddie, super. Freddie has just arrived.
Here because you asked me.
Well, I would thank you very much. Okay, well, just come around.
Scoot over.
Just a little interruption here. Frederica Fellows is, can we pull a chair out?
Sure.
She's got a chair right here.
We're all
Make
set.
room here.
Come on over here. We'll put you up here. If you have to leave early, we will move and just, actually, you want to sit right here? Would that be more comfortable or right next to?
They're the same here.
Okay.
Hello.
Freddie. Freddie has arrived at absolutely the right moment. Freddie Fellows is the person that I was talking about, whose family owned the property. Dougie here had just talked about the two older women that I mentioned to you, who came and bought the house. Exactly. In their 40s. That old? So, I think right now, what was your reaction to?
Well, all right. First of all, I'll tell you that that piece of property is one of the oldest pieces of property in Warwick. I was looking for it and I couldn't find it from the Hawes book and so forth. And that was one of the first grants, that piece of property that the house is on. And so it's one of the older homes in Warwick.
Okay.
And I don't know who actually had it built. My great-grandfather bought it from a man by the name of Knapp. And my great-grandfather was the chief of police of the city of Cambridge, and that was his summer home. And I did bring a picture, and this little baby is my father, and that is his family. And this is the house as it was,
Yeah.
because my father was born in 1907. This is about that time, and my great-grandfather had a Stanley steamer.
Is there any way,
You can pass those around.
Shane,
Yeah.
how do we have, I'll give them to.
And this
have them.
is how I really picture our house. See, I still call it our house. How I picture our house as when I lived there, it had the porch and the gardens and so forth. But anyhow, when my father bought the house, was eventually sold out of the family, and it was owned by McDonald, Mr. McDonald, who was a supervisor of the CCC camps in this area. And that was who my father purchased it from. And my mother, being a city gal, her family thought that she was completely out of her mind to move up to Warwick, no electricity, no running water, no inside plumbing, etc. Except we did have a toilet there because Mr. McDonald was all set to go, so what we do now, if we run no electricity, we pour some water down and flush the toilet that way. But, and my father loved the house. Loved it, loved it, loved it. He loved the history of it. He loved the fact that it was an old home. And we thought, and he had passed away very young. He died at 57. And my mother at 54, they had their business in Cambridge. And she did not have a driver's license. She had one, but just for identification. She did not drive. So there was no way that she could live here. And her business was there. So the house had to go on the market. And I did finally remember the man's name, Mr. Avery, from Wendell, was the realtor. We thought on the up and up. And so it was heartbreaking to sell the house. But we were led to believe that we were selling the house to people who would appreciate this older home and love it and nurture it the way we had. However, that was not what happened. It was, they bought it, and then immediately they sold it to the commune, which they had every right to do. But I remember standing in a bedroom window looking down and seeing all these commune members coming, and I thought I would never stop crying. I was absolutely heartbroken. This was my home. This was the house that my father loved. He loved the history of it, and he would take people around the house and show them every little thing. And so not only losing your home, but losing it to people who wouldn't appreciate the older home and keep it as it was. which it was not kept as it was, of course, because you can't have a number of people living in a home and have it the way it was. So, but you know what? Life goes on. I thought I would never stop crying, but I did. Life goes on.
Yeah.
But it was a very sad time. So I'm only here at Steve's because Steve's a dear friend of mine. Otherwise, I have nothing really positive to add.
I'm just going to say, Freddie, I'm hoping that being here and hearing some of these really cool people, we've already had Harry.
I have no hard feelings towards anyone.
Just say
I
that
really
Harry
don't.
has
Yeah.
already had to
Yeah.
admit that he's actually related to these two members through marriage to these two members who were in the commune. Harry's brother married Dougie's sister.
No.
So it's, and I was kind of hoping that, you know, a little
Well,
bit
when people look at this picture, not only is my father there as the baby in arms, but the little child on the left is Marion Copeland, who many of you at the commune probably knew, and that was my father's sister.
Okay.
She lived down on the Wendell Road. She came up from the city because her parents didn't care for the young man she was going with. So he came up and she married a lumberman and proceeded to have 9 children.
That sounds.
All right.
So that didn't work out quite how they planned, but
No, it didn't work out for our parents either.
but anyhow. And then if you look on the back, on the same side, this couple are the Levises, and this is my grandmother's sister, and they're the grandparents of Elmer Johnson, who I'm sure many of you
Yes,
know.
know Elmer very well.
So, yeah, and so we have long roots in Warwick, and we love Warwick and love the history of Warwick. Of course, we have 4 children, but once you educate them, they don't stay here. So
Related to Greg.
They'll be back, right?
Greg Fellows, Calvin's nephew.
Right. Yeah,
At
I
the
went to school. I
time.
graduated
Yeah,
with him.
yeah,
in
yeah.
Plymouth.
At the time, Marion Copeland was the postmaster
Yeah.
in
Right.
Warwick.
Yeah, yeah. So that's all I have to say.
well, you can add as we go along here. It's sort of
Now, one thing that I can remember about the house, it's kind of on the comical side. Some of the things that I have to say are probably on the negative side, but that's down the road here.
tighten our belts.
One thing that I remember that was kind of comical, it was a 2-story building, and it had an attic, and they needed more room. So they cut the rafters off at the outside wall, and they all got together and they pushed up the roof and built another wall and made a 3rd-story dormer.
That was in the dorm or the house?
Not the dorm, the house.
The house.
Yeah,
The house.
Yeah.
They made
See,
a,
that's what I said.
they made a 3-story building.
You didn't
out of it
cherish the
by
home.
Pushing up
Oh, we restored
The
all the
roof.
chimneys.
by
You
hand.
d- I
They did
know
it
what
by,
the chimneys
they
were in
just
bad
cut
shape.
the rafters
Yeah,
off,
right.
and then everybody
They were
got
not
together
usable.
and pushed up the roof, and they built the wall.
So-
They had 3 stories.
Okay, so the reason why we had to do that was in the summer, I arrived in like July of 1970. I lived out in the woods, right, in a lean-to or in a tent or whatever. Winter came, it got cold, the snow started falling, and the word went out, everybody in the woods, in, right? We went to the attic and just had mattresses lined up across the floor in the attic, because that's the only space we had. We hadn't built the dormitory yet.
So the commune has come to Warwick. What
Yes.
happened after it arrived? I mean, we've heard a little bit about
Okay.
People came.
Yes. but,
And came.
And came.
And came.
Well, when
Yeah.
you guys say that first year, how many people were at the commune?
I believe there was somewhere between 200 and somewhere up to 250 to
I think
300 people.
when you first got there's probably about 60,
60
between
to
60, around 60 people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I came in July, it was up to 70 odd or 80, and I'd say it got up to 200 real
Yeah.
fast. And we wound up, I think, with about 300 people.
And
there.
we're looking at 1970.
Yes.
Sort of for a
Yeah.
time frame on
Yeah.
this. Okay.
And so one of the things we discovered soon after moving in is we thought we had a pond on the property. It wasn't a pond, it was a cesspool. There was no adequate sanitary a functioning septic system. And that's one of the things that the town knew about, was the fact that we did not have a septic system. And this is, anybody can fill in how they want, but this is how I think it proceeded, because I ended up building a massive septic system, and that's how I became an excavator. But what happened was that the town came in and they condemned our property, and they put up these huge signs, and so the hurt goes both ways. I mean, there was a lot going on, and these huge signs saying unfit for human habitation.
We had nothing to do with that because
I know
I
that.
retreated to my own little space and I would not even drive by there.
Yeah. No worries. So what happened then was we realized that we actually, a large group of people in the greater community of Franklin County came to help us, and several lawyers, the head engineer of the School of Engineering at University of Mass, Curtis Johnson, came to our aid. But at first what happened was we actually went to court, and the judge says, wait a minute, to the town fathers. You sold us, well, one thing was it was a restaurant and an inn. It ran as a restaurant and an inn. And you as the board, you as selectmen, and at that time selectmen and Board of Health were synonymous. They were the same group, allowed this inn and restaurant.
Really wasn't an inn.
Well, what it was called
restaurant.
that. It was a restaurant.
Yeah,
So it was still
restaurant.
a restaurant.
Yeah,
And you have to have
restaurant.
proper
Yeah.
sanitation facilities for restaurants. So anyways, the
Not
judge
Warwick.
says, not Warwick, I know. Believe me, I've been on the Board of Health. I just retired, but
Just
anyway.
a quick aside, I'm going to interrupt Dougie here.
Yeah.
There was a statement at the end of the town meeting in Gill, which had their town meeting this last Monday. And it was basically a commendation, and it was quite lengthy, about Doug Edson here, who had been on the Board of Health in the town of Gill for
33 years.
33 years, and there were nothing but superlatives. So Dougie actually maybe learned a little something up here in Warwick.
Yes.
Was able to
I think,
move on.
and I do. I think what happened in Warwick. So anyways, the result of it was basically you've got to give these people a chance to put in some type of working sanitary facility. So anyways, with the help of Curtis Johnson, we designed this huge septic system. And I'm talking, it was for the dormitory, it was a 12,000 gallon septic tank. And then there was a 2,500 gallon pump station and 72 trenches, 3 feet wide, 75 feet long. That was and then there was also one for the main house. So basically, almost every bit of open land we had turned into septic.
Leach field.
Grass
Leach
grows
field
greener,
and
right?
Yes. And if you all know the soil in Warwick, it's tough. And at that time, the system was so large that it was not under the jurisdiction of the town Board of Health. It was under the jurisdiction of it's now called DEP, but it was Department of Quality Engineering or something. But they actually had a satellite at UMass. They had one of their western office was at the University of Massachusetts. So as we were building this system, with me and about 4 or 5 other guys, we went out and we bought a backhoe for $5,000, And we had somebody truck tons of stone in. We got a tractor trailer load of pipe out of New York, you know, the old Orangeburg pipe. The tanks came, the concrete tanks came in 5 tractor trailer sections from A. Rotundo Sons in Connecticut, you know. And so we started building this massive system and learning how to use a transit, how to lay out things. And because it was so big, there would be every Wednesday and Friday, 2 gentlemen from DEP would show up and inspect. And one of the guys' name was Eugene Dranka, and we called him Dracula because he did not like us. And the other gentleman was much younger, and he ended up becoming head of DEP, and I saw him a few years ago when he retired. But anyways, they actually, them coming up and inspecting every Wednesday and Friday, it was really excellent training for us. Because if we made a mistake, we had to tear it out and do it over again. So it really taught me the fundamentals of how to do septic work, you know, and so anyways, when we got done with this project, it just, you know, whatever. I took those skills with me for the rest of my life and pretty much developed most of the infrastructure and all the other places we moved to and did things, so.
So I'll just interject something. You're probably wondering, well, how the heck did you get the money to do all that? That was partly thanks to me. I came from an upper middle class family in Connecticut and had, my great aunt had died by then and had given me stocks, $40,000 worth in Aetna life insurance. And I was over 21, so they were mine, but I hadn't touched them. And the policy at the commune was when you came, you got to hang out for a couple of weeks, check it out, see if you liked it, and then you decided, I want to stay, or this isn't for me. And if you said, I want to stay, then you had to go before the little group of the special people, or really the original folks. And, you know, you kind of got grilled, and one of the things was you had to give everything that you have goes to the commune, and you own nothing anymore. So I didn't tell anybody about what I had
I wouldn't either.
sitting back at home. And one day I said, I need a car, I gotta go home and get some stuff to bring back to the commune. And on my drive home, I went back and forth in my mind. Nobody knows about it, I don't have to give any of it. Well, I could give some of it, but keep some of it for myself, for the future. But I'm supposed to give all of it, maybe that's what I should do. And this thing went on and on and on in my mind for the hour drive, and finally, I just said, screw it, I'm gonna do it, I'm just gonna give it all. I'm in. And so I got home, I told my dad, I want those stocks, I'm gonna give it to the commune. And my dad was a very low-key guy. He said, well, it's your money, you can do what you want with it. And he arranged it all for me. And so I remember one day I was out apple picking, and Chris Garland drives up in the car and said, Debbie, come with me. And the check had arrived, and I had to sign it over. And consequently, we had our septic system built, which was great. Right?
Yeah.
Now, Harry, do you have, while this whole business with the septic system was going on, and there was the Board of Health from Orange and various individuals, what was happening in the town? Because Harry was actually working for the Orange Enterprise and Journal. I got that right?
Weekly newspaper.
Was a weekly newspaper. He was the reporter on the scene.
Well, the biggest impact that I can tell a story about is it had an impact on local politics here in Warwick. And give me a moment. I need to give you a little bit of background on my mother, who grew up in Brookline outside of Boston, but ended up raising her children in Florida. I won't go into why, that's not relevant here. But in 1968, between my sophomore and junior years in college, she decided to move back to New England, and she bought the house that my wife Babette and I now have at 49 Athol Road. And the two things that are relevant here about my mother to this story is, one, she was very sympathetic to the youth movements of the late 60s and early 70s. And the best way to illustrate that is that when my brother Stephen, who is 7 years younger than I am, was enrolled at Pioneer Valley in school in the fall of 1968, he was, after about 6 or 8 weeks, suspended for refusing to get a haircut. And my mother's reaction was to go and contact the local chapter of the ACLU.
Yeah.
So that tells you where she was. The second thing that's relevant is that my mother was a very good accountant, and she began to keep the books on a part-time basis for a local lumberman named Steve Clark, who now lives in Orange, but then lived in the house Ginny Fellows has now. She and Steve Clark became good friends, and the commune came to town, and one evening, he was then married to Rosemary Lincoln. Rosemary came over and they sat down at my mother's dining room table, and Steve said, I've decided I'm going to run for the Board of Selectmen because I'm tired of my taxes going up to pay all these lawyers with this fight with the commune. And Steve was an old Yankee in that respect. And he said, I went up to investigate for myself, and I'll admit that these people have a lot of peculiar ideas, but they seem harmless. So I don't see why my taxes should be going up. And if you know Steve, you can see him saying that.
Yeah.
Well, my mother, who was no stranger to political organizing, got up from the table, went into her den, and came back with a stack of index cards. And she looked at Steve and said, Steve, it's a small town. You'll know how everybody's going to vote, whether they're for you or whether they're against you. And I want you to fill out an index card on every voter in town that you have contact with. Are they committed to you? Are they going to, I forget who was running against them. Are they undecided? And then she turned to me, and my mother said to me, and you figure out who to go talk to at the commune, Harry, and get those people to register to vote. And it turns out the person I had to talk to was Doug.
That actually was very scary for the town.
Yeah.
You go to a town meeting, and they had you remember, downstairs was filled, upstairs was filled. They had microphones, and Ralph Witherell was the moderator who did a wonderful job.
That's one of the things that
That you-
I wanted to talk about.
Oh, well, I'll let you
Great.
talk about it.
Is the,
George, just a quick question on this. Do you have, in your paperwork there, do you have a sense of what the voting public was for the town of Warwick, exclusive of the commune? How many voters were there in Warwick? Was it like 350, 400?
yeah,
would
it's
say in
somewhere
that
around
neighborhood.
350 to 400.
Yeah, in that neighborhood, yeah.
And the commune registered something like 120 or 150 people. So you imagine, as Freddie just alluded to, if you were living here at that time, suddenly the whole body politic changes enormously.
Yeah.
So I'll just finish up briefly,
Yeah.
George, and I'll turn it over to you. Election day comes, and as Steve said, I was working for the local weekly newspaper in Orange, and I came home, walked down to town hall to cast my vote, and there at a card table in front of town hall were my mother and Steve's wife Rosemary and a stack of index cards. And I come out from voting, and my mother hands me 3 index cards and says, these are 3 sure votes for Steve. I don't care what you got to do, but in the next hour before the polls close, get him here to vote. So I got him there to vote, and the election was very close, and we had a recount, and after the recount, Steve won by 3 votes.
Good
job.
It was something like, I was one of the
Constables overseeing the election?
counters, I
Yeah.
ran the ballot box and I worked with Betty Earl counting the way it came out that I remember, that Steve won by 1 vote over Bob Coker.
It was
Yeah.
Bobby, okay.
Yep.
And so then Bob petitioned for a recount. During the recount, it came out that Steve had the same amount of votes that was original, and Coca lost one. So Steve won by 2. That's the way I
Okay.
recall it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, getting into this town meeting, it only happened once, where we had to have the 2-story, there's 2 or 3 copies there. The 2-story town meeting that we had. And,
Downstairs and the main hall.
And the main hall, yeah.
They had a TV camera downstairs
Yep.
with a TV upstairs and vice versa.
Okay.
They had a moderator downstairs and a moderator upstairs. And, the whole purpose of the meeting was to vote on this money to pay the lawyers. And the commune members came down to vote that down. They didn't want to
And all they had to do was all
have the
stand up
town
and,
spend the money
That was
to
it.
pay the lawyers. And they were successful in getting the article voted down. But then somebody from the commune had the audacity to stand up and say, we'd like to go back to that article and reconsider, because we were here just to make a point.
that they could do
Well, man,
anything
I'm
they wanted to
telling
do.
you,
Yeah,
That
it was very
caused quite
scary.
a commotion in the hall.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention their names here. I mentioned that I was one of the constables, and I was up in the back of the room upstairs, and I saw 2 guys stand up with red faces and clenched fists. Ed Gillespie and Al Olson. They were livid about them doing that, voting it down first and then wanting to have it reconsidered. Well, Ralph
Just so that we
Witherell
would
was-
know where we stood.
Yeah, Ralph Witherell was a pretty good moderator.
He was.
Knew how to keep calm, and he refused to reconsider that article that night.
Wow.
Month later or so, we had a special town meeting to vote that same expense. The commune members weren't there, and it got voted through unanimous to pay that expense.
When was this? Just in terms of, is it?
It's on,
It says 71.
Okay,
March.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
March 1st, 71.
Yeah, if I was working for the Orange Enterprise and Journal, it would have been 71.
yeah.
Okay.
I'll just tell one story, funny story about Harry being on the, writing for the Greenfield paper, and was it the Enterprise
The
and Journal?
Orange paper.
Well,
or
at
the
first I
Orange
was a
paper.
stringer for Greenfield's Recorder, then I went full-time for the Orange
Yeah,
Enterprise.
and I was on this running for school committee, and so he wanted to interview me, and I said, no, I said, I can make a fool of myself by myself, I don't need any help. Do you remember that?
Do you
No,
remember
I'd
that?
forgotten that. But thank you for reminding me.
Wow. So, I don't know, just, the story just continues. Are we beginning to see, and this is sort of to you, Dougie and Debbie, we're at 1971, has the community expanded in terms of, when did the dormitory go up? And when was the completion of the septic system, which probably was important to having the dormitory go up? I don't know.
So I could say the little bit that I know, because I really wasn't that involved in building a septic system.
How could you let them
I
slip
played
by?
the guitar and sang songs, but I remember that it was fall of 1970 that the dorm was first begun.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of you remember the building, but it was gigantic. It was
Oh, yeah.
100 feet long.
100 feet long,
and
30 feet wide,
3 stories high. I mean, it was
That was Brian?
huge. And that was
Smith?
Brian Smith was
yeah.
the
Okay.
head
by
organizer
Clarkie's
and
Lumber.
envisioner or whatever of that building. And that first winter, so winter of 70, 71, I remember this because when new people came, they were called prospective members, and the prospective members needed their own special little area to all sleep together, because they were kind of kept separate from the members. So there was one room in the first floor of the dorm that we finished up enough, winterized it, so there was insulation in the walls, probably exposed, some bunk beds and a wood stove in there. And I don't know, maybe 12 people could sleep in there or something. And that was the PM room, the prospective member room. And then members took turns going out and sleeping there with them for a couple nights. And I remember doing that. That's why this is a special memory of mine about the dorm. Nothing else in the dorm was finished yet, but that one room, that first winter, was done. And then gradually it must have just, I bet you by next summer that we were probably using the whole building. I mean, we had so many people to work on it. You know, get your hammer, get your nails, you do this, you know, and women up there doing, nobody knew what they were doing except for a few guys, but you had plenty, they told everybody what to do, and many hands makes light work. It's true.
And then, Steve, just to continue on a little bit about town business. In 1973, for selectmen, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Edson ran for selectman. Emmy Maynard ran, and Patricia Spiller. Edson got 150 votes, Pat Spiller got 70, and Emerson Maynard won with 169.
Wow.
Yeah, 19
That
votes.
was in 1973.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to know what the change would have been if Pat Spiller hadn't run.
Oh.
I don't know.
Good point. And that was 73.
Yeah.
1973.
Yeah.
When did Maggie run?
75, which, and I think the question is, when did Maggie Striebel, my wife, my former wife, when did she run? And that was a little bit later, and I think we can talk about that a little bit more, because that figures into what was the effect on the town after the community basically left. And right now, I think there are probably more things. I think there's some pretty funny things while the community was in town. For myself, I remember one day driving down Route 91 on business or whatever, and I look over on the other side, traffic coming up from the Springfield area, and there was a little Honda going by. I counted, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever.
25. Yeah.
And I had what's this all about? And I had, when I got home that night, I had sort of mentioned it. And I guess it was in the Greenfield Recorder.
Yeah.
Dougie, you can take it. Oh, wow.
Well,
What happened on that?
We needed cars.
we needed inexpensive transportation. Basically, as we evolved, we realized that we had to get jobs and go back, not just live off the land, because we were incurring debt. And so a lot of us, we actually we went out and got jobs. And a large group of us applied for work at Belchertown State School. At the time, there had been a number of deaths there, and they were really understaffed, old entrenched union, not a lot of forward thinking, and there was just a lot happening there. So anyways, a large group of us went to work there, and I think it helped. It broadened my horizons and made my life richer. But going back to the cars, we needed inexpensive transportation because at that time, if we remember, we had our first oil crisis, I think and a major recession in 1974. So, and that's when we were lining up for gasoline, and so these
Every
little
other day.
every other day. Yes, you had your
Yeah, right.
odd and even
Yeah,
day depending
exactly.
on your number plate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, anyways, these little Hondas were there were little Honda sedans. They were actually I don't know if they were 4-door or 2-door, but I can't. But they did. You could
Must
seat
have
four.
been
You
2-door.
could seat 4 people in them, and it was a 400cc engine. It was basically a motorcycle engine. And they were developed for inner city driving, I think in Japan or something, but they were only like, I don't know if they were like $2,500 a piece or something, but we bought like 26 of them from Belize Honda in Springfield. And so, you know, I remember living here in Warwick and motoring down to Belchertown High School, and
And I remember when they brought him to town,
yeah.
they chose to thumb their nose at the town by driving all of them around and around and around and around.
I don't think I was part of that, but okay.
They didn't really
I
want
don't
to endear
remember
themselves.
that.
Oh, God. Well, I just remember the first winter storm. I think there was like 10 accidents or something. They were very light and didn't handle well on ice.
I
Just a
remember
quick-
driving to work one day in winter in my little Honda, and I slid right off the road. I got out of the car, I picked up the front end and directed it back towards the road, got in, and then drove to work. It was crazy, but I remember doing that.
Yeah.
They were so light, they were
Yeah.
like nothing.
When talking about this, I had mentioned the whole Honda thing, and I can't remember. It was someone here in town, and he said, "Oh yeah, I remember those. They were in the trees. They were in the ditch. They were all, you'd find them anywhere." Was it you, George?
No.
But that was sort of the thing, and certainly the lightness. I'm just going to say, what this is really, in terms of the progress of the commune. What's really important about this is the fact that people in the commune realized that they couldn't stay here in Warwick and basically subsist. There were not jobs. Farming it's some of the worst farming country in probably in New England. I don't know. And what they had to do was that they had to travel to be able to support their commune. And go ahead, George. You gotta.
Well, just a couple of comments that have to do with the early days of the commune before we get into them leaving town. I can remember the incident where a bunch of them, male and female, wanted to take a bath, so they went down to Moore's Pond and they all jumped into the pond without any clothes.
That wasn't just once.
And also, Wickles Pond, is that the one, or the one over here on Orange?
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, yes, we used to go to Clubhouse all
That's
the
all right,
time.
that's off the way.
And then another,
Yeah, the Moore's is a little,
another
yeah,
funny story
yeah,
in the
yes,
early days.
yes.
They, somewhere along the line, they decided to start the band,
Right.
Spirit in Flesh.
Right.
And they were gonna go around the country and put on concerts. And they had to build a PA system.
Yeah.
So they started building these big speakers, you know, as high as the ceiling.
That was the other half of my money.
And then, you know, they were designing a system to put these speakers through a PA system to make them work. And they were having a lot of problems
Yes.
trying to make it work. But they finally solved the problem, and they cranked it up at 2:00 in the morning. And everybody for 2 miles around came out of bed wondering. Charlie Lincoln,
God,
he was the
poor
chief of
Charlie,
police
poor
then.
Charlie.
He went up and told them, you know,
Keep it down.
and the guy said, "Isn't this beautiful? We finally got it to work. Isn't this beautiful?"
in a kind of sort of way, yeah. Oh, yeah. I just like to say a couple of things about the town too. Really nice. Steve Clark was a dear friend. Really, really helped us out in so many ways. And the Bowers family, Art and his boys. We helped them out a lot, and we used to get in trade. We'd get manure for our gardens and things like that. And I remember helping. Artie had a big dispute about this house in the middle of town here. He owned.
Yeah.
And I remember helping him put up chicken wire. So he could fill it with chickens because
he
he was
did.
mad at the town, you know. So,
He did. Turned
Yeah.
it into a chicken house.
yeah.
Well, I think the selectman at that time was Al Miner, was one of the selectmen,
Yeah.
or was Board of Health maybe, and Al lived directly across the street.
Yeah.
And I think that's a whole story, which isn't really,
But
but I
I
can
know.
very, very quickly know. It was Memorial Day in 19, I don't know, I thought it was in the 60s, but it was later.
No,
Was it in the 60s? At any rate.
no, it was
Was it while you guys were here in
70s.
town?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Okay. Well, what happened was there is a parade that goes to basically all the towns in the Pioneer Union. And on the day that the parade was to take place here in Warwick, Arthur and the boys, with manure spreaders and various tractors and vehicles with chickens, and I believe there were pigs, there were rabbits, various other beasties, and they started up from their farm and going up to the house, which was the old Alden place, is what it's
Right,
referred
yeah,
to.
yeah.
And they proceeded to go up and to move in the tenants, that these tenants would be legal tenants, and that the neighbor, Al Miner, which was actually kind of funny, and Al didn't take it particularly well, and they were tacking on wire and putting in the new tenants. And at some point, the parade drove by this as the Bowers were there with all this stuff in the street. And I actually happened to know about this because my wife and I ended up buying this house a few years later from Arthur, and going in there and basically having to shovel out the inside. Fortunately, what was it? Mabel Alden had linoleum. Hazel
Hazel, yeah.
had linoleum put over all of the floors, which was still there, which was a godsend because it meant we had to peel that stuff up. And Arthur sent his two boys over, John and brother, and they parked the spreader in the backyard, and we shoveled for a couple of days. And where all the chicken shit and all the other stuff went was over to Harry's mother's backyard, where they had this big garden, and that served the garden for actually a couple of years. It's an
Perfect.
aside, but you guys were definitely
Sustainability.
You were a piece of well, they knew about the sustainability thing.
Yes.
So,
The other good thing about working at the Bowers farm, I did that for a while, went and shoveled shit every day, but we got to go into the farmhouse for lunch. And we had white bread and eggs, and believe me, that was just the most fabulous treat.
no granola, huh?
No,
strange,
no brown
strange bread.
rice without butter or anything. A few vegetables, yeah.
So, yeah, Artie used to get this, would be like the Hostess Twinkie guy. They would go and dump all their, over what, yeah,
Past due.
past due
Product.
and he would feed it to his animals. And he also got animals from the local auction that were not feeling well or ill, and he would try to raise them back and then resell them. But I remember being over there and going, "Hey, don't feed that to your pig."
I'll take it.
I haven't had a Twinkie in 3 years.
Ivan has just suggested, if any of you guys, gals, have questions or comments, Shane has set up a mic so you can talk right where you're sitting, and it should be picked up and it will be recorded. So if there are comments, was it Stephen that had, did you have a comment?
So, yeah, I have a comment. So, Doug, is your handle Bear?
Yes.
Yes. So I will go back to the first time I ever met you. So
Okay.
I was living with Yezha Shanowski, who you I'm
Yes.
sure you remember.
Yes, you.
And Yezha was out of the Brotherhood at that time,
Yeah.
and we did our own little commune thing over in Royalston. And Yezha said to me, "Geez, we're gonna go down to the bakery down in Orange, which the Brotherhood had a bakery down
That's
there." And
right.
he says, "Maybe Doug's down there." So I didn't know you from Adam. So Yezha brought me down there, and he says, "Well, I'm gonna introduce you to a few different people." And we went to the bakery, and he says, "Where's Doug?" And they said, "Oh, he's in the back." So we walked down the back, and Yezha says, "Maybe he's in here." So he opens up the door, and it turns out to be the toilet. And the first time I ever met you was sitting down on the toilet.
I don't remember that.
I do, yeah, that did happen. And I do
Wow.
have another comment about Steve Clark.
Mm-hmm.
Want me to wait, Steve?
You go.
Okay.
No, this is,
So
anybody.
I don't know if
Yeah.
I don't know if you've talked about what Steve Clark did, but I guess at one point, the Brotherhood built that complete dormitory.
Right.
Except I don't think the carpentry was all quite up to snuff,
That's
because I worked for Steve Clark starting in '71, I think it was. And at that, not too much after that, or right around that time, that dormitory, because it was so tall, it didn't have any collar ties in it.
right.
So there was an immediate call out there to get that building so it wouldn't actually collapse.
Right.
And so Steve happened to, as you said, he was a very good friend of the Brotherhood, and so Steve got he had some old skidder cable kicking around.
Exactly, with the
So
cables.
we ran some skidder
Yes.
cable through the top plates there to keep that building from coming
Exactly,
down.
yeah.
So that's just a couple
That's,
of comments.
yeah. It was definitely a community effort.
Yeah.
It's really amazing that there were people in town like that who could see past this, how weird we all were, long hair and different clothes and totally unconventional lifestyle, but could see us as human beings with some worthwhile values and reach out and be friends to us. I mean, that's amazing to me. It's really, says a lot.
Yeah, about that, about that same time, I got on the police department because I ran for constable in '68. And then Charlie Lincoln, he talked me into becoming the truant officer. Some of these people that came to the commune brought their children. And of course, there was the issue of required education. Well, a lot of people in town did not want these kids to be going to the local school with their kids. So I guess they got into some homeschooling. And I had to check in with some of these people, and I'll tell you, I spoke with some girls that were highly educated, that were serving as teachers, to teach these kids in a homeschool environment.
Yeah.
It was truly amazing, the amount of education. They had bachelor's degrees and doctor's degrees, and they were living up here.
Yeah.
Speaking of their education, as I said, I was on school committee, and the school committee, and I really and truly, once the house was sold, I didn't drive up there. I knew nothing what was going on in the commune. I mean, it kind of just out of my life completely. But being on school committee, we had to go up and inspect the school that they were running. And that, I can tell you, was very, very, very difficult to do. But, we did go up and, and see what they were teaching and so forth and so on. And it was, as you say, fine. But, and now, of course, homeschooling now, so many people do it for various reasons. But they did have, their own school. And as I say, it was difficult to have to go up and inspect it.
And then there was the attempt to buy the Warwick Inn.
Oh,
Wow,
I kind of
okay.
remember that, yeah.
This is why we're gathered here today. We're finding these things out that probably hasn't made any of the.
That caused a lot of
Greg, what was it,
commotion
Greg
around
Williams
town.
or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
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 Oh, yeah,
Well,
we
that might have
had,
been the
He was
son,
a-
Bob Williams.
we had
Bob,
some
yeah,
very
Bob, yeah.
exciting,
Yeah.
we had some
Craig
very
was a
exciting
character.
meetings
Yeah.
in the upstairs of the fire station on that issue. I won't go into a lot of it, but man,
Did we try to buy the Warwick Inn?
yeah.
Oh,
That was,
Did you have any money left?
well, gone by then.
It was in the works that the Common was attempting to buy the Warwick Inn. It never came to being, you know, it
Why
Glad-
why
It
did
happened.
you move to Warwick?
Why, well, we desperately needed a home, a place.
Well, so did we.
Yeah.
Freddie, in
Yeah.
the early part, before you
Oh,
arrived.
you were
Yeah.
talking
No, no,
about
I
that.
just,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Doug
Yeah.
had gone over that,
Yeah.
and he sort of gave us a synopsis of the progression
Yeah,
of
w-
places that they would
yeah.
go that
Right.
didn't work.
And it was a large piece of property.
It
Yes.
had a lot of
And
excellent
26
things.
26
Exactly.
acres.
We wanted my mother to advertise it in Yankee Magazine. You know, at that time they would advertise
Sure.
homes, you know, that needed.
It wasn't rough.
It was because actually it had a hot water heating system,
Mhm, yeah.
and Calvin and I were supposed to be taking care of it all the time, and it with the ice, you know, probably a power outage or some, and the ceilings and so forth had come down. There was a
Yeah.
lot of damage inside
Yeah.
from
And that's
from
what,
that. Yeah.
When
Yeah.
I was one of the early people to go over there, and I remember standing in the basement, the cellar, with Elwood Babbitt, and it was up to my
Mm-hmm. Oh, I
knees
can
in
believe
water.
it. I can believe it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there was a sump pump there, and it's one of those old ones,
Yeah.
kind of like the lawn, stood up like that, and I was holding it. Elwood plugged it in.
Yeah.
It was like, and then I was getting this incredible electric shock, and I realized that I couldn't
do
let
this.
go. I couldn't let go, and he unplugged it. It was like, oh, because
Thank
you know,
goodness.
but yeah.
Yeah.
We have another question
Well,
from,
actually, that ties exactly into my question, which is, these are wonderful stories, and obviously this was all possible because Warwick probably didn't have zoning in those days. But my question is that today, would it be possible for a bunch of unskilled people to build a 3-story house, to build
Probably
a
not, because you have to have all the
300-person
permits and they have to
septic
be.
system?
Well, we
With
had a
all
permit.
that-
We had a building permit
You
on
did.
that. Yeah.
Would it be possible for all these people to
Inspections.
do things themselves
did for
and
your
learn it
septic,
all
yeah.
themselves?
Yeah.
well,
Well, we learned. Yeah, it was a learning curve,
yeah,
but
zoning came about because of the commune being here, I can tell
Right.
you that. And one of the rules in our zoning is no more than 6 unrelated people can live in the same dwelling.
That's thanks
It's
to
not
us.
really enforced,
Yeah.
I can tell you, but that's in our zoning, that
yeah.
no more than 6 unrelated people can live in the same dwelling. And that was one of the things that was brought about in zoning, but our zoning came about because of the commune being here.
that to answer your question, I think one of the issues, it actually would go under the building inspection process. And there are a whole slew of, for example, if it is beyond a certain amount of cubic footage, i.e. the building you're planning on putting up, and I don't know exactly what you move into a commercial zone
Right.
in terms of building.
Yeah.
Puts you into a completely different ballgame, and it enacts things like sprinklers, it becomes
Yeah.
very expensive.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, probably not.
No.
You have to move to a place like Warwick, get something way off the road, and put a pad on your hammer so it doesn't make a lot of noise, and just start building. I mean, that happens not quite to the degree it happened up on Shepherdson Road. But I think that's probably the answer, that there's enough in various codes. And increasingly nationwide, it's hard, and as a fellow that's related to that, I find it pretty frustrating sometimes. So, George.
Just one more story that I have. relates back to what you were saying about the PM. You know, you were given a period of time, and then once you decided to stay, you had to turn over all of your life savings, you know, to become a member of the commune. And, you know, I was on the police department. I had a blue phone in my house. The blue phone was a system where 4 or 5 of us police officers had a phone in the house that all rang at once. And whoever picked it up first took the call. And I remember one night, we were in bed, the blue phone rang, and I picked it up, and there was this girl. She was at the commune, in tears. They were telling her to get out. But she didn't have any money because she had given it all to them. And the only thing she had was a ticket home, a plane ticket home that her folks had made sure that she took with her when she joined. So I turned over to my wife and I said, we gotta get dressed. You know, and this was midnight. And my wife and I got in the car, drove up to the commune, and she was standing out at the edge of the road with a grocery bag with whatever her personal belongings were. She jumped in the car, and my wife and I drove her to Bradley, left her off so that she could get on a flight in the morning, and then we drove home, went back to bed.
Wow.
You know, so I just wanted to mention that, you know, the commune probably, for the most part, was a noble cause. But it wasn't all peaches and cream.
No.
I don't think anybody would even venture to go near that one. I just, before we get back onto maybe the third phase of all of this, we sort of hinted at it, there is a comment, and Harry may not remember this, but there was one day at Audrey's, his mom's house, where he now has a home, and Harry was sort of speculating, as Harry did from time to time, and was kind of known as sort of the intellectual of the crew. And he was just saying, you know, I don't think that people have grasped the fact that there are, and I gave a number, 300 people up there, who if they were out in the world and not there, and not having a certain amount of destination and purpose, would very possibly, and he said this would affect local government, county government, state government, and maybe even the feds, that some portion of monies that all of us would have to pay to support these people, not that Harry was demeaning them in any sense, but he said there is a very positive thing to what they're doing up there, and it's probably something that a lot of people wouldn't even relate to. But I think, in fact, Harry was right. You know, while they were there, while they were together, and while this experiment was happening, there were a lot of people, and I think ultimately when you look at this, there were a lot of people who kind of got their worlds together, their personal worlds together, and later on were able to go out. You look at the number of businesses and what have you. There are a lot of success stories about that place. That's a little piece of it. I so remember that day of Harry speculating, and it's like, God, he's absolutely right. So anyway, let's keep moving, because we all have, I don't know, gardens to plant and what have you. It's Memorial Day. You gotta get tomatoes in the ground.
I have a comment, a
Please.
couple comments I could make.
Absolutely.
I was in high school when all this was going on, and I remember it all very well. And one of the things that me and my friends used to do, with a store was open at that time, and we'd be down at the store, and people would come through town and ask for directions to the commune, and we'd give them directions out Old Royalston Road, the other direction.
Is the bridge out then, or?
And tell them, just keep going, you can't miss it, just keep going. And a while later, they'd come back through town, they wouldn't even look at us. They'd come back through town, so but another thing I remember was we had a dance at Pioneer, and Spirit in the Flesh was the band at Pioneer, and we went and regular dance. We had a great time. But when I got home, I went through this interrogation from my parents about what was said, how they were, and because there was a lot of trust issues there, and it was just interesting that. I got grilled like that on the way back. They let us, everybody went, and it was nothing different than any other dance we went to, really. And but I remember being interrogated when we got home.
How was the music?
It was great. Yeah, they were good. Yeah. They were a little flashier, a little bigger than the typical bands that we had at dances.
I have a Spirit and Flesh
Yeah.
album.
So they were pretty good. And I remember also going into that dormitory just before it came down, and just going in and walking around in there, and I was just not amazed by the size of it, but the amazed at how long it stood, because you could tell that people were wielding hammers and saws that really didn't know what they were doing, and it was pretty rickety.
Now, when we had this other meeting here, I told a story, and I'll repeat it again. In the late 70s, maybe early 80s, there was a prison escape in Georgia. And the two guys, they overpowered a guard, and they took his badge and duty belt, and they escaped somehow. And they made their way to Warwick, because one of them had originally been a member of the commune. They thought that it was still here and they could use it as a place to hide out. Well, it had closed by then, and so they didn't have any alternative but to go up Shepperson Road and down White Road, and about halfway down the hill there's a logging road that goes into the right. They set up a campground in there. And they didn't stay there very long. They left there, and they were captured at home, because typically that's one of the places that most prison escapes end up going, is home. Mm-hmm. And they just stake out their home, and that's how they capture them. Well, they wanted to get this duty belt and badge and items that they took back. So they had one of these guys draw a sketch of where their campsite was. Well, one day Brian Peters and I were out in front of the store, and Jim Connolly drove up. You remember Jim Connolly?
Jim Connolly was a state policeman who was sort of a local hero.
Yeah.
Interesting guy.
He was an undercover agent in his and he showed us this hand-drawn map. He said, "You guys know where this is?" I says, "I know exactly where that is." So we jumped in our car and we went out there and we walked in that logging road, and sure enough, we found that campsite. But we didn't see this stuff. But we started walking around. BP went one way and I went another, and John Connolly went the other way. And we eventually found all the stuff.
Wow.
The duty belt that had mace on it, handcuffs, we found the badge. And
Wow.
Jim Connolly took it back and mailed it back to Georgia, and they were all happy.
Well, we've alluded to, and Dougie has, the whole Honda escapade and why that basically took place. And I think what people here in Warwick who were members of the community found more and more was that they had to travel to be able to work. And I don't know what the process was. I think there was a property in Northfield, maybe Beth's, and various other places that were more proximate to where they could work. And more people, Doug and I were talking about this just the other day,
Yeah.
that it's not like, okay, the commune, we buy the property and then suddenly there are all these trucks and everybody arrives and bingo, there it is. The other end of this is that the presence of the community and the people in the community in Warwick began to dwindle slowly over a fairly long period. I mean, maybe a couple of
Yeah,
years.
until about
Yeah.
75, yeah.
Okay.
You know, I was thinking about that this morning because of
Yeah,
our conversation. And what happened was that we bought basically the center of Turner's Falls. At one time, we bought the entire block of the Shea Theater and the Colley Opera House. And I believe like 6 or 7 buildings in downtown Turner's are in that space. And
When was this, Doug?
this was,
72, we were already headed into Turner's.
yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So this was all developing at the same time, and a lot of it was due to the fact we had almost like two different communes in a sense. You had people that were more media-minded, people that wanted to promote the band, people that wanted to do photography. We started a greeting card business. We started a silk screening company. We had this a place called Cucumber Grocery. It was a grocery store. We had a record store called Record Wrap, and we had a pizza place,
Zapmia.
Zapmia Pizza.
Zapmia Pizza,
Yeah,
baby.
baby. So
And the Noble Feast.
and the Noble Feast restaurant. We also developed. We built private coaches for different rock and roll bands, and we also owned 4 custom coaches that we leased out to different bands. We work with, I mean, major. We built 2 buses for Rush in Canada. We built a bus for Elvis Costello, which got shipped to England. We built a media bus for Channel 22, which is an educational, Channel 2, not 22, but Channel 2 in Boston. And a lot of us did, at the same time, in the summer, when I was doing my excavation business, I was training drivers on the road during the winter months, and driving. I did almost 7 years of private coach driving. I did 5 tours with Elvis Costello. I did 2 tours of Southside Johnny and the Asbury Jukes. I did the Wall tour with Pink Floyd. I did a Queen tour, and we worked with various bands with the Grateful Dead, Carla Bonoff, James Taylor.
Don't forget Arlo. You used to work
On
on
Arlo, we
too.
actually worked on Arlo Guthrie's bus too.
And a question, who had the stinkiest feet?
Oh God, Barbie Chenard from the drummer for Squire.
What about Elvis Costello? He used to hang his feet over the... At any rate, that's a total
That
aside.
must be, yeah, no.
So, but at any
Yeah,
rate, what
but
Dougie's
yeah.
just said is that the world has moved
Right.
away from Warwick.
Right.
There are a few people that are trying to farm here, and then when they bought land in Gill, there was some excellent land for doing all kinds of things there that it began to dwindle. And
Right.
How about when they were in Northfield? Weren't you in Northfield for a
Yeah,
period
we
of
were
time?
88 Main Street, yes, which
Yeah.
was the original American Youth Hostel.
Yeah.
And that house burned,
Oh, that house burned.
yes. We also had a house in West Northfield, right on the railroad track, right?
When you say original, do you mean the very first
Was the
American
American,
Youth
it was the
Hostel?
very first American, that was owned by Elizabeth St. Clair, also known as Benny Hapgood. That's her. She was a handwriting analyst and a very spiritual woman. That very wonderful lady. That we used to hang out at her house when we were teenagers, before we even started the.
So you grew up in this area?
I grew up in Northfield, yeah, and I graduated from Pioneer in
Well, yeah.
1968.
Okay.
So I graduated. There was
I
a whole bunch of.
I taught 59, 60,
Oh,
and
did
60,
you?
61, yeah.
Okay. No, it's a whole. I was talking Cindy Day. I graduated with her. I graduated with Sue Maynard.
George's sister.
George's
Yeah,
sister.
my sister.
Sure.
Emerson Maynard's daughters.
Yeah, yeah.
I graduated with Sue.
Yeah,
Greg Fellows.
Yeah.
Richard Shepherdson.
Yeah.
Dick. We graduated
Dick,
together,
yeah.
same class. Yeah.
Well, that sort of gets us to at least a sense of why the commune moved away. And basically, Dougie and I were talking the other day, and Dougie was sort of implying that, it just sort of was abandoned in a way. People would come and check on it, but he came up at different times and hauled things away to take to wherever it was needed elsewhere. And
don't
you
most communes do that? And, because communes, this,
we're just maybe, and I
the
we can-
history of communes and.
yeah, or we can talk about the Shakers or various
The
other
Shakers,
communal
actually, the most
organizations.
successful communes,
Um,
probably,
yeah.
yeah.
They were.
Yeah.
When was the property actually sold? Do you know?
That I-
1977.
77.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's when
Was
the commune sold it to a guy by the name of Poria.
yeah,
He had it for just a short period of
and
time
he sold it.
and sold it to Jerome Willard.
Yeah.
And Jerome Willard was the one that restored it. He put the roof back where it should be. And
I never went in. My mother did and my sister, but I said I
Kinda
can't go
restored
in.
it.
I did not. Yeah.
And then Paul Hadsel Jr. and his wife bought it.
okay.
They own it to
So
this
now
day.
his estate.
Paul's an engineer.
Yeah.
Well, he's passed away.
Paul
now. His
Jr.
estate owns it, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
He just turned
His
it
daughter,
over to it, before he died, he turned it over to his daughter.
His daughter.
School. I remember Paul in school. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it still all one piece of property, or did it
No.
get divided?
No,
it
no,
got divided.
no.
Yeah.
No,
No,
where the dorm was
Yeah.
broken off into another
Right,
block,
and,
and another house was built
and
there.
across the street,
Our
that's a
friend
separate
Tom
property
Wyatt
too.
and
Yeah.
She's right here.
Yeah.
they live
Yeah.
there
Susan,
now.
Who was another the gentleman we hiked the Grand Canyon with?
Tom.
Tom Hardy. He
He's
built
the
the
one
hou-
that built the
He
house.
built the house. Yeah.
Tom Hardy
Yeah.
built that house.
Right. Yeah. We hiked with Tom twice to the Grand Canyon.
Grand
yeah.
Canyon, yeah.
Wonderful man.
Yeah, he's the one that
Definitely
built that
wonderful,
house. And then sold it to, were you the
Yeah,
ones that
Ben
bought it from?
Stevens and I, Susan Wright, bought it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I guess the final piece of it for us is, and I'll look at maybe George, people that were here, were there any lasting effects that the town of Warwick felt? I will say, and Harry maybe can speak to this a little bit, is that there was, I think because of the community here in town, an increased kind of political awareness. Elections were well attended, town meeting was well attended, people came out, I think.
Now they don't.
Well, that's a different thing altogether.
That's another story,
It's
yeah.
sad.
Yeah.
I will say that,
Yeah,
but I think.
and I do think that people, because we don't want to talk about that, but people, I think, young people today feel isolated. I think that, perhaps maybe the commune at that time served a purpose of people being together and feeling apart, because quite a few of them came from very wealthy homes and had wonderful homes. And, I guess over the years, I say this is my home, but your home is, a building is not really your home, but even though that's what nurtures you all those years. But I do think that right now, a lot of our young people feel isolated. And perhaps time is ripe that another commune, perhaps, that might be a way of feeling part of a group and feeling that there are people who care about you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, the feeling part of a group was huge for me. So many of us expressed the feeling that finally my family, somebody who understands me and who is saying and thinking the same things I am, is huge.
Or,
it is
or
like,
maybe accepting what you think, even if it's stuff different from what they think.
yeah, but we had
Yeah.
we had basically a general concept, which was there's something more than just this world. There's a life. There's a spiritual life. Who are we really? We're something more than just this body, right? And that I wouldn't say 100% of the people who were there. I was a little naive when I was there. I thought everybody thought the same way I did, but pretty close. The vast majority of the people who were there were on an earnest mission, spiritual mission to understand more about who am I, why am I here, where am I going, and what's beyond, what's beyond here. And we explored that in depth together. And we spent hours meditating. We read tons of books and shared alternative ideas. And did you read this guy? He says this and this. And, worked on psychic phenomena, seeing auras, understanding chakras, understanding healing techniques, herbal medicine, organic gardening. I mean, we were, and how wonderful to have this group of people to do it together with. I couldn't have done it by myself. To have that support and that constant inpouring of information and excitement and enthusiasm. It was. I look at my Warwick years, couple of years I spent here in this town, which is just a gorgeous place as far as I'm concerned. One of the most beautiful places on the planet in a sense, it's just beautiful here. I look at it as like some of the highest times in my life, and that's no drugs. No drugs. No, that's serious. It needs to be said, because people had a lot of, they just figured we were up there doing drugs. We weren't at that stage of the game. There were no drugs. We weren't even really drinking yet. There was a sign on the property that people saw when they came: no drugs, no alcohol, no promiscuity. And it was serious. That was serious. So it was an amazing time, one of the highest times of my life, really. It was just incredible. There was so much growth, inner growth, exploration, and excitement and enthusiasm. It was really phenomenal. So a quick Ivan just gave me the sign. You can hype your book if you want.
Just quickly, Harry, did you have a comment?
Well, I have one very personal anecdote to add here, which is that the commune became involved with this woman, Beth Hapgood, in Northfield, and Beth Hapgood had a cousin who was a freelance writer in Boston named Fred Hapgood. And Fred came out here to write a story about the commune, and he walked into the general store, was open then, and said, I want to learn about the commune. And Tony Shadis, who still owned the general store, said, well, go see Harry Greenwald, he works for the local newspaper. And Fred and I became fast friends, and a few years later when I moved to Cambridge, I said, Fred, could you help me meet people in Cambridge? And one of the people that he introduced me to is now my wife, Babette.
That's a nice story.
Well, it was suggested there is a book here, kind of wonderful book. Deb, if you'd like to say a few quick words.
Okay, very quickly, this is a few years ago, there's a group of about 15, 20 women from the commune who have, over the years, some of us stayed in contact through all the years, and then gradually some of the other ones popped back in. And we do an annual week every year on the Cape together, just the women living in a house together, cooking together, sharing bedrooms together, just like old commune days, singing together, and meditating together, and once again exploring our personal growth together with each other. Anyway, one of the women, Patty, said, we have to write a book. We were part of history, right? So it took us 5 years. I think there were 15 of us that contributed to the book. And it's not only about our experiences in the commune and what that meant to us, but it's also about our personal philosophies and how we've applied it to our life. To me, it's a very, very beautiful story. And to me, this is a core expression of what the commune meant to me. It's that those close friendships rooted in spiritual, wanting to live life from a place of love and a place of promoting peace and promoting togetherness, not separation. All these women are come from that same space, and so many of the people that were in the commune, that's the space that we came on, and they've moved on and carried it in their lives, through their businesses, with their families, and just a way of life that promotes goodness. So anyway, we did wind up finishing the book, and there's 2 copies here at the library, which I'm just going to donate to you.
They're
Just
for sale, if
keep 'em.
anybody wants them.
keep them. And I'm donating this to you to the library. But anyway, it's kind of hard to express what that meant. That.
I think, Debbie, you've done it very well. We've really gotten a sense of it here today.
And I think it's a really well-written book, and I love reading it. I learned a lot about the commune,
Cool.
and about my pool friends, Deb and Doug. And yeah, I think it's a good read.
It's a great book.
Yeah.
I recommend it as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'm just going to say on that note, everybody, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Oh,
And
thank
you guys, gals, George Day, Harry Greenwald, Deborah Edson, Frederica Fellows, Dougie, thank you so much. And I.
And Steve Striebel.
Yeah. Hey,
God.
thanks for pulling this together.